Hey everybody, today I'm down in Southern California driving the luxury hybrid Outback that Subaru simply won't give us. Yes, you guessed correctly, this is the new Toyota Crown Signia. You can look at this not just as an upgrade from a Subaru Outback if you want more luxury features and significantly better fuel economy, but also a better priced alternative to something like a Volvo V60, which is smaller than this, or a Volvo V90, which really isn't much bigger, but both of them will certainly have bigger price tags. Probably the best place to start this review is to talk about what Toyota was trying to do when they created the Crown Signia. Obviously, this is a replacement for the Venza in the Toyota lineup. It starts in the mid $40,000 range, but doesn't go on up into Lexus pricing. Aside from that, however, the format is very different. It's a little bit crossover right back here, and certainly a lot of station wagon going on in the front. It's 194.1 inches long, so it's about 2 inches longer than the Subaru Outback, but about 1 inch shorter than the Volvo V90. All direct competitors to this, depending on exactly how much you want to spend on your new vehicle. You could also cross-shop this against certain versions of the Jeep Grand Cherokee or say a Honda Passport. Those are right here in the same price category as the Crown Signia, but very different kinds of vehicles. A number of the key competitors will definitely have more ground clearance than this. We find 6.7 inches in all versions of the Signia. You'll find over 8 inches in the average Subaru Outback and well over 8 inches available in the Grand Cherokee lineup. And that's part of why, instead of giving us matte black trim all around and golf ball textures, things like that here and there, Toyota decided to give us an off-roady look with the cladding around the wheel wells and down here on the sills, but they made it gloss black, so it's definitely a bit more of an urban chic kind of look. We have roof rails up here, crossbars are optional, and you'll notice that the roof height is definitely significantly lower than a Passport or a Grand Cherokee. That's one big reason to get this, and one of the reasons that I really love the off-roady kind of lifted wagon format. Because if you want to put your skis on, or you want to put your bicycles on, or kayaks, or whatever, to do whatever you want to do out in the woods, it's going to be a lot easier here to lift them up, especially if you're a shorter person, than in something like a Passport. The Passport's pretty high off the ground already when it comes to the ground clearance, and then that roof line is even higher, making loading some of those things a little bit more tricky. Getting back to the styling, let's talk about the front end. This is obviously a lot less controversial than, say, a BZ4X, but there's still certainly some style-forward aspects to this design. You'll notice we have these really slim DRLs up top. These also act as the turn signals, and then we have what kind of looks like a horseshoe shape right there, but this is in fact not part of the light module. It's just a cut line on the hood. So from some angles, it does sometimes look like the hood is open when it's actually not, but they didn't want to make the light wrap all the way around there and give it a full C shape. The headlights, those are actually down here in this darkened section down there. No fog lights down there at the bottom. And the grille, which actually gives me some Lexus vibes, merges from the front all the way into the body rather than being a separate panel, kind of like we see in the Lexus RX. There's also some additional cooling going on up there, and then the radar sensor right in the middle. For 2025, the Signia is going to come in only 2 trim levels, XLE and Limited. Right now we're taking a look at the Limited trim, although they're both pretty well equipped. This has the 21-inch wheels and 235 width tires. Moving around to the back, I noticed a few things right away. The first thing obviously is the really slim LED light bar that spans from one side to the other. It sort of mimics what's going on up front. We have red turn signals, one's blinking over there so you can see what that looks like, rather than amber turn signals like you'd find in international markets. The other thing I noticed, which I will apologize for, is that this is a really bright white car. It's kind of a pearlescent white, and it's really bright outside. And the camera's having a tricky time with that, so I apologize if it looks weird on camera. This is the Limited trim. We have the Hybrid and Beyond Zero badging over there on the other side, even though hybrids are kind of before zero, but that's for a different video. At the bottom of the bumper, we have shiny black plastic like we found around the sides. I think it gives this an elegant two-tone look. It definitely goes with the black spoiler on top, but I could see this scratching pretty easily because you can see that this shiny black section right here is the area you would be dragging luggage over or against or brushing up against when you're loading. Before we get to the hybrid system, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate all of our subscribers and of course all of our members as well. You are the reason that we're able to get access to vehicles like this new Crown Signia to share videos like this with all of you. And a big shout out to one of our viewers who was driving by on his motorcycle and said hello. So if you're watching this video, that was you I just said hello to. At any rate, back under the hood. Only one hybrid system is going to be found in this Crown, and that is a little bit different than the Crown sedan. This is the 2.5-liter planetary power split hybrid system, and it's actually my favorite one, so I'm glad they didn't bring us the Hybrid Max. 240 horsepower is the system total for this system, and you get that from the engine over here, 2.5 liters, 188 horsepower in its own right, and the two electric motors over here on this side, plus an electric motor in the back. So we have the two-motor planetary split system and an E-axle in the rear. That E-axle is one consideration to keep in mind. If we're cross-shopping this against an Atlas Cross Sport or a Grand Cherokee or something like that, obviously those have mechanical all-wheel drive systems, so they can send significantly more power to the rear axle. This one is going to be limited to 53 horsepower, 89 pound-feet of torque. On the other hand, most of the competition will be limited to around 20 miles per gallon. This is EPA rated for 38 miles per gallon. Clearly that has to do with the low hood, the low roofline, and the sleek profile, but it's still significantly better than a Subaru Outback. And the Outback Turbo is probably the closest corollary to this. You will get more power and better performance in that model, but this is notably peppier than the base engine in the Subaru. Let's take a moment to talk about battery chemistry. I know a decent number of journalists and some viewers are going to be fixated on Toyota still using a nickel metal chemistry battery pack in the Signia, and indeed in a lot of their hybrids in North America. And Toyota really is alone in this. Most of the other car companies out there have moved on to lithium-ion cells in their hybrids and plug-in hybrids. Why is Toyota still dedicated to this chemistry for a battery pack? Well, it's actually quite logical. The first thing, of course, is Toyota has a lot of experience building these batteries, so they have baked-in knowledge. The second thing is nickel metal chemistry batteries are less expensive than lithium chemistry batteries, and the cost of all the components on the open market, the commodities cost, is more stable. So it's easier to project exactly what this battery will cost 5 years, 10 years down the line. So cost is a significant factor. Then the reality is that the other factors where this battery does not perform quite as well as a lithium-ion pack just don't make enough difference to convince Toyota to stop using nickel metal packs. And again, I think this is the right way to go about it. Yes, a lithium pack could theoretically give you a hair better fuel economy, but we're not talking about an enormous difference. And if it makes the vehicle more expensive, it's a little bit harder to justify that half a mile per gallon fuel economy bump. The second thing is they don't actually reduce the curb weight of a hybrid vehicle like this. Nickel metal packs like this in most hybrids in the Toyota lineup are around 110 pounds in terms of weight. And when you look at the total weight of a liquid-cooled lithium-ion pack in, say, a Ford Escape hybrid or something like that, they actually weigh a little bit more, because nickel metal packs like this can be air-cooled, they don't have to be liquid-cooled, and all that weight of the plumbing, the extra complexity of the pumps, etc., it's all going to factor into the cost and longevity of a vehicle like this. Toyota has hundreds and hundreds of millions of proven miles out in the wild with their hybrids, and that's why they're sticking with this tech. The one area where a lithium-ion battery pack could improve something like this is in packaging, because the battery pack is effectively located back here in the rear, sort of under the rear seats, and you could get effectively a little bit more headroom if the battery pack was a little bit smaller. Yes, nickel metal packs are about half as energy dense as lithium packs, but that doesn't mean the entire package deal could be smaller, because you still have to have the steel box, you still have to have the cooling, whether it's air cooling or liquid cooling, there are cables, etc. in there. So the physical constraints of the battery pack are still going to be fairly decent when we're talking about swapping this pack out with a lithium pack, and then what's the benefit to you as a customer? It wouldn't be enormous. The front half of the cabin is essentially shared with the regular Crown, so we find the same driving position and very much the same seats as well. These offer power two-way adjustable lumbar, two-position memory over there on the driver's door, and a nice degree of adjustability. Also, long seat tracks, so if you have longer legs or you're taller, you might find this a bit more comfortable than some of the options where you can't move the seat quite as far back. Taller drivers should know that the moonroof is optional, but it does not open. It's just a fixed sheet of glass, and if you get this option, then you're not going to get quite as much headroom up front. The seating position is a little bit more upright than something like a Toyota Camry, but it's not quite as upright as something like a Passport or a Grand Cherokee. Jumping into the back seat, we find a bigger difference between this and the Crown sedan, because the roofline is of course more horizontal since it goes back there to a hatch, not a more traditional trunk. And you will certainly notice that if I move over here to the middle seat or move all the way over here to this side, that the ceiling is decently away from my head, even though this has the optional moonroof here. Again, doesn't open. But the shade, etc., does occupy some headroom, so again, if you want more headroom in the back, just like in the front, you want to skip this particular option. The seating position in here is much more reclined than something like a Grand Cherokee or a Passport. So if you're looking at legroom figures, keep in mind the different formats of the vehicle will mean one is going to be more appropriate in one situation versus the other. There's definitely enough room in here, I think, to put a rear-facing child seat, even behind a taller driver up front, but based on the numbers, that may not be immediately apparent. The reason is the way legroom is measured. Remember, it's a calculated measure from effectively your hip point to your knee and then down there towards your feet. It's not simply a measure of how far is one seat back from the other. And this seat back dimension is what's more critical for child seats in the back. The last thing I should mention is that this interior feels about as roomy as a Subaru Outback. I don't have access to an Outback right now to test them in person, but I suspect that the differing legroom testing methodologies is why this appears a little bit smaller, but in real world situations, this is probably going to be right about the same size. When it comes to cargo capacity, logically we don't find as much as we'd find in a boxier vehicle like a Passport or a Grand Cherokee, but you can still line up 22-inch roller bags back here. You could line up about 4 of them across the rear and some extra luggage between that and the rear seats, especially if you remove the roller cargo cover there. But you will find more cargo capacity in the boxier SUV alternatives. Diving under the load floor, we don't find a spare tire, and that did surprise me because Toyota has been known for putting spares in a lot of their hybrid models. This is one of the few that don't get one, but I suspect you might actually be able to put one in this suspiciously spare tire shaped well right there. The 12-volt battery is back here on this side, and then we get a little bit of additional storage space around everything. For our interior tour, I've hopped into a different limited trim. This one has the lighter colored interior. You'll notice that the ceiling is still relatively dark. The other thing you'll notice is that this big panoramic moonroof does not open. It's a 2-pane design with this relatively small pane above the driver and front passengers' heads, but neither that nor the larger one in the back actually open. Then we have that pretty big structural bar running right across from one pillar to the other. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger, 2-way adjustable headrests, and a seat design that looks very much like the Crown sedan. There are some exterior differences, but architecturally the Crown sedan and the Crown Signia were designed together. We have moderate bolstering on the front seats, but the front seat design itself is relatively wide, so I don't think larger folks would have any troubles fitting there. Moving over to the front doors, we have a higher percentage of soft touch materials than we find in, say, for instance, a Toyota Camry. So soft touch upper on the door, soft touch midsection, soft touch armrest right around there with some stitched materials, and then harder plastics down there at the bottom of the door. Moving over onto the dashboard, we see a repeat of some of the C-shaped themes that we found on the outside, like around that air vent right there. Chrome bar running right there across everything. And I like the way that they've tackled the two-tone question in here. So we have the sort of brown, saddle brown kind of accents right there running across that section of the dash and the midsection of the dashboard. The only miss, I think, is that this hard plastic piece is pretty obvious right here. It's the same sort of injection molded material that we find on the doors, but then we have the soft touch materials up above it. So this saddle brown section is the same material that's on the doors, imitation leather, soft touch injection molded upper section, and I just kind of wish they had wrapped that a little bit further around that dashboard section. We have a pretty big glove compartment here. It's a slot style glove compartment, so you probably could fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside, but they would stack sort of like books, not quite on a shelf, but sort of on a table there. Moving over to the middle, we have the large touchscreen infotainment system running the same software we find in other Toyota models. Of course, it supports wireless CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. Below that, we have 2 big air vents. Dual zone automatic climate control is standard. Also ventilated seats here, nice touch. We then have a slot style Qi wireless charger mat. This is kind of interesting. It helps keep your phone pressed up against that charger interface, and actually I had no problem charging my smartphone, even though the cameras stick out a bit and this thicker case has sometimes been problematic. We have 2 USB-C charge only ports right there, big cup holders, one with a removable divider. Joystick style shifter, similar to what we find in other Toyota models with the drive mode selector right there, EV mode, auto brake hold, and electric parking brake. Then we find a padded center armrest with a bifold door setup, so you can open it from either side right like that. There's a little divider in there and a reasonable amount of storage ability. Keep in mind that versus something like a hybrid Volvo wagon, which would have a big battery right here in the middle, there's no battery and there's no transmission or all-wheel drive system under there, so we get a little bit more of that room back. Moving back over to the driver's side, I was surprised that we don't get a heads-up display. We just have this large full-color LCD instrument cluster. It's running the same software that we also find in the Crown sedan, so it is relatively configurable. And we have the same driver attention monitoring system right here on on the steering column, but no semi-automated driving software. So there's nothing like the Lexus Teammate system brought down to this. I am a little bit disappointed by that. I had kind of hoped that they would have something along the lines of the Nissan ProPilot Assist system, etc., since that's progressing along, and of course Ford has Blue Cruise. The steering wheel is definitely very style forward. Shift paddles here on the back of the steering wheel, down there, up over there. Controls for the adaptive cruise control system, and then the infotainment system lower, and then controls for that multifunction LCD over there on that side. All the way over here on the left side of the driver, we have some really nice touches. I like the way that they've designed these button modules into this surround section of that LCD. I think it's a little eccentric on the style, but I do like the functionality of having these buttons nice and close at hand. At the bottom of the dashboard, we find the button for the power hatch, and then on the driver's left-hand side, we find the buttons for the driver's seat memory. All right, now it's time to get the Signia out on the road, and I have chosen this particular road surface because it's really, really poorly paved. And I could honestly see the Signia competing very directly against something like the Subaru Outback. And this is exactly the kind of road surface that Subaru shoppers love to drive on. And I would say this actually does really quite well here. One of the advantages to having a more wagon-like profile like we find in the Signia and of course in the Subaru Outback is that the suspension doesn't need to be as firm in order to give you solid handling ability and a decent quality ride. Even on this aggressively washboard gravel road that I'm on right here, this is very comfortable. Now, if you were wondering at the beginning of the video why the Signia was so dusty, this road is the reason, because I've been going back and forth on it to try and see how it behaves at different speeds. Again, really rugged washboard pavement here, but the Signia just soaks those bumps up quite nicely, even in this top end trim with the biggest wheel and tire package that's available. This soaks up the potholes, the bumps, the speed bumps, etc. quite well also. Now let's get to the numbers, of course. 0 to 60 in our preliminary testing down here in San Diego. Keep in mind these are not official numbers. This one took 7.1 seconds to go from 60 miles an hour to 0. I'm just gonna dance around some of these extremely large potholes here so I don't pop a tire. That's actually a pretty decent showing. You will definitely take a little bit longer to go to 60 if you're taking a look at something like a regular Subaru Outback, not the turbocharged model, of course. But then we have that turbocharged model, and then we have the Volvo hybrids. There's also a Volvo plug-in performance hybrid in the V60. Obviously, performance is going to be a little bit lower than the turbocharged Outback or the higher horsepower Volvo options, but this actually stacks up really nicely against the base turbo engine in the V60 or, of course, the V90. Now, as far as stopping distance goes, I haven't been able to officially test that, but in our preliminary tests down here, it took 120 feet for this to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. That's a pretty decent time, just about what you'd expect for something this size and this weight. If you're concerned that approximately 7 seconds 0 to 60 sounds a little too slow, fear not. This actually has the same sort of peppy feel that we find in other Toyota hybrids for the exact same reason. Well, I should say most Toyota hybrids, because of course this uses the classic planetary power split system. So taking off from a stop here, it's going to feel very much like an electric car with a generator doing its thing under the hood. And that's due to the design of this hybrid system, which is why some people sometimes call this a CVT or an eCVT. The big thing to know is that this doesn't have a transmission in the normal way you would think of a transmission. The 2 electric motors and a single planetary power split system act as the transmission here. So power transitions are very, very smooth. If I floor it, we get pretty much instant torque because we have that big electric motor, and then the engine catches up and helps you along and gives you that 240 total system horsepower. But because this does not have a traditional belt and pulley CVT arrangement, you're not actually waiting for anything to shift because there's actually nothing inside the transmission to shift. You just have those 2 electric motors. The big electric motor is the reason that regen braking is so smooth in this vehicle. Definitely smoother when we're talking about the way that regen feels as we're coming up to this stoplight versus, say, a Hyundai or a Kia hybrid system where the power has to flow back through a stepped automatic. Now, Toyota does, of course, have the Hybrid Max systems in their lineup, where they also have a 6-speed automatic transmission, or in the rear-wheel drive vehicles, an 8-speed automatic. And those hybrids, they're not going to be as smooth feeling as this one. So I'm actually glad that Toyota decided to put just this hybrid system in essentially the Crown wagon at the moment. In the regular Crown sedan, you can choose between the two, but this is my favorite system, and this is exactly the way I would get the Crown sedan as well. Now, as far as handling goes, obviously I'm not driving this at home, but I have been able to spend a reasonable amount of time on some of the winding mountain roads down here in Southern California, and I have to say that the promise of the wagon format really does work here. Because we have a lower center of gravity than you'd find in a bigger boxier SUV, especially one with 8 or 9 inches of ground clearance, they were able to give this a slightly more supple suspension tune, which, as I said before, helps with the ride quality, but they're also able to give this just better driving dynamics, just because the center of gravity is lower, etc. I also tend to like the way that this feels. It's a little bit more car-like in the way the suspension is tuned versus some larger SUVs. So if you're really torn between something like this and, say, a Honda Passport, you should know that the Passport is, generally speaking, a little bit firmer, even though it's more of a traditional boxy vehicle. On the other hand, this is actually going to feel better out on the winding mountain roads that I've been on today, and it's certainly going to be significantly more fuel efficient. Even though I've been hill climbing, driving this aggressively, 0 to 60 testing it, etc., I've been averaging 32.5 miles per gallon. That is significantly better than you'll get in any of the two-row SUV competition. And there aren't really many other two rows to cross-shop this with, and that is sort of the tricky thing with this vehicle. It's ostensibly replacing the Venza, but you know, it's not quite like the Venza, it's not quite like the first Venza, it's not quite like the Outback or the Volvo or the Honda Passport or any of the other competitors in this sort of two-row, I don't know, $45,000 price range, whatever we want to call this. And for me, at least, I like that. I think that Toyota did exactly the right thing by making this a bit different and giving customers a different option. The question, of course, will be, is anybody interested in that different option? And I want you to all let me know down there in the comments section. The last thing I should cover is the cabin noise. Obviously, I have not been able to cabin noise test this, but they have said that this is going to be quieter than the Venza. So hopefully I'll be able to get one of these at home and run it through that test as well. I would say it definitely appears quieter. Cabin noise is something that Toyota has struggled with over the last few years. Their entries in every particular segment have not quite been as quiet as others, but I think that this actually is more in keeping with that. This certainly is more quiet and more refined than the Subaru Outback. It's probably closest mainstream competitor, and I would say it also comes across pretty quiet when stacked up against something like the Honda Passport. Of course, bear in mind that the Passport is not exactly a spring chicken, and hopefully we'll be seeing an all-new Passport at some point soon. Last but not least, I suppose you could also cross-shop this against something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Obviously, very different format of vehicle, and the Grand Cherokee gets significantly more expensive than this, but it's also a two-row vehicle, and it does have a plug-in hybrid system available. However, that plug-in hybrid, it's not nearly as efficient as this regular hybrid. By the time you're watching this video, Crown Signias are probably already in the United States. I'm actually filming this in early April. Production has already started, but the boat hasn't left Japan. And this is going to be built in one of Toyota's Japanese factories, not in North America. So that does change the lead time, especially if you want to get particular colors and option combinations. When it comes to pricing, keep in mind this is not targeting the Subaru Outback directly. It's targeting maybe the customer that wants to upgrade from an Outback or has outgrown it as far as wanting luxury features or better fuel economy, better cabin quietness, etc. This is going to start at $43,590 plus a $1,395 destination charge. That is, interestingly, more expensive than the most expensive Subaru Outback, but only by a hair. The Subaru tops out at $42,795 before destination, so pretty close. If you're looking at that top end, limited touring trim or the Onyx trim, etc. of Outback, definitely consider something like this, because even the base XLE trim is really well appointed. You don't get all the features that you see in this model, but you don't actually have to pay that much more if you want those. It's going to top out at $47,990 starting in the limited trim, and there are going to be just a few things you can check as far as option boxes. That means that a fully loaded version of this is actually notably less expensive than the Volvo V90. The V90 is the closest in size. It starts at $59,800, but I suppose you could also cross-shop something like a Volvo V60 Cross Country. That's going to be $51,695, so actually it's going to start where this leaves off. And that puts Toyota in really kind of an interesting window because they have effectively sandwiched Subaru and Volvo, the two main wagon purveyors in North America. And yes, I hate to tell everybody that wants to believe their Outback is something different than a wagon. It is a wagon, so is this, and I appreciate the fact that Subaru and Toyota don't run away from that. You talk to Subaru, they're like, yeah, it's a wagon, of course it is. And that is exactly what's going on here. I think more people should take a look at a form factor like this. No, the cargo area is not going to be as roomy as something like a Honda Passport, and that goes without saying. The Passport's cargo area is big and it's boxy, but this is still very accommodating, and I would say if you're shopping for something like a RAV4, you want something much nicer on the inside with a more comfortable back seat, better on-road driving manners, and still fantastic fuel economy, you should take a look at this. Now, the fuel economy in the RAV4 Hybrid is just a little bit better, but keep in mind the RAV4 Hybrid doesn't have tires that are this wide, and it has a different generation of the hybrid system, different version I should say. They're all based around a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine under the hood, but the motor setup and the total power output of the systems is different because they have different missions in mind. The RAV4 Hybrid is a bit more focused on fuel efficiency. This is a bit more focused on performance and, of course, the larger size of the vehicle as well. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. What would you cross-shop against the Crown Signia? Do you think the name is weird? I kind of wish they had just called it a Toyota Venza, just called it the next generation Venza. I think that would have worked better in my brain, but I don't know about you. Any way you slice it, they're not expecting to sell an enormous number of these. They're saying it's going to be about 15 to 20,000 units a year, maybe something like that. So logically, significantly less than the Subaru Outback and more than we'd find in the Volvo lineup when it comes to sales. I think that any of those customers that's willing to give this a shot is going to like the format, however, because we do get a quieter, more civilized cabin than something like that Subaru. I know I keep saying that, but it's definitely true. And of course, we get driving dynamics and ride quality that are both better than the average mid-size two-row crossover in America. So Volkswagen Atlas Cross Sport, Passport, Murano, whatever you're shopping for in that particular segment, I think you would do well to give something like the Crown Signia a look. You'll get twice the fuel economy and you'll only give up a little bit of cargo capacity in the back. Let me know what you think about that down there. Stay tuned for all the other videos that we shot out at this event. Those are going to be coming up pretty soon. And of course, if you haven't already checked out the videos on the new Camry, the Land Cruiser, the Tacoma Hybrid, and the 4Runner, be sure and check all of those out as well, because those all should be live on the channel already. See all of you later.